Hi, I'm Laura, your connection coach. Have you ever felt lonely? In a world that feels increasingly divided, it is more important than ever to find ways to connect with others. Loneliness is a common experience, but it doesn't have to be a permanent one. On the Bliss Republic podcast, we explore all the ways we connect with each other and discuss the benefit of having strong relationships. We believe that the key to overcoming loneliness is connection. My guests come from all walks of life and will hear about their unique experience with connection. Whether you're looking to deepen your existing relationships, build new ones, or simply feel more connected to the world around you, the Bliss Republic podcast is for you.
All right. So today on the Bliss Republic podcast, we have with us Cole Chance. Cole, you are a professional yoga teacher who has been teaching for over 10 years now. Your teachings are particularly interesting as they are anchored in a deep exploration of the mind and the spirit, recovering from several addictions for people who are joining you on this journey. You have personally overcome the addiction to alcohol and celebrate 11 years of sobriety this year. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Your life happens kind of between the east coast of Australia, Colorado, and Bali, where you spend the majority of your time leading people through your programs Emerge Recovery, as well as your very own yoga teacher training. You also offer highly renowned retreats all over the world. So welcome to the Bliss Republic podcast today.
Happy to be here. Yeah.
We met in 2019, I believe, 2018, 2019 for the first time when you came to Australia and you met my beautiful friend Josh, and now it's your partner and you guys have been together for a while, settled in a beautiful home with lots of animals. And I'm really glad to call you my friend. And we have been on and off visiting each other. So it's always really nice to catch up and see where our lives are at. And I'm very grateful to have you on today.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. Yeah. Happy to know you. Happy to be here on your offering.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So, Cole, can you give us a bit of an overview on how did you get into yoga?
Well, I actually took my first yoga class in rehab. So I was in many rehabs in my 20s. I always joke I was on rehab tour. I went to like 6 different rehabs in 6 different states. So I was a traveler from way back. And one of them, surprisingly not all of them, only one of them had yoga. And that was the first time that I'd ever done a yoga class. And it was like, oh, it felt different. Typically they're shuffling you like in and out of all of these, workshops and cognitive things and heady lectures and stuff like this. And so it was very different to then get into the body. And I actually come from, like, I have quite a body-based background. I always played sports when I was younger, danced, things like this. So to be reconnected to my body and also to recognize how unconnected I was pretty shifting for me. It was even like, take your right hand to your left foot. And you're just like, what? Like that's how deep I was in my addiction. And to come back into the body, and not just the body, but the breath, come back into the body and the breath. It was very powerful. Felt to give myself a felt sense of connection and disconnection rather than just talking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when we go through our healing journey, we kind of do have to, that's what I recognize a lot as well. When we're in it, we have to first do the cognitive processing. But then there is a point where our body keeps still doing the old thing. And we have to really rewrite that script in our bodies. Is that where yoga helped you work through it?
Yeah, and I think it also gave me, it gave me some spaces to really check in a different way. There's something about being with yourself on a mat. It felt kind of ritualistic in a way. It felt like a more honest space.
More honest than what?
Life could be very, very loud and very, very busy, and it was easy for me in particular, to think that there wasn't a problem. Now, to anyone on the outside of my life, it was very, very obvious that there was a very, very big problem. But I was under the illusion and under a lot of, well, delusion. I was in a ton of denial and a ton of delusion about I was fine. I was fine. I was fine. Everybody just needed to get off my back. Everyone needed to quit telling me what to do. Everyone needed to whatever. But it was not a problem. And there was something about being on my yoga mat that it was harder. And when I think about being on my yoga mat, I'm not thinking about being in warrior two. I'm thinking about like being in child's pose, like in those moments after the movement, or those something about, moving for an hour and then that stillness at the end where it was harder for me to say, there's no problem here. I don't have a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so it always felt really tender to me on my mat, because it was like there was some veneer that was happening in my life that I was really good at slathering this veneer on, that for whatever reason with the movement and the breath was taken away. So it wasn't necessarily, I say sometimes, like, it wasn't necessarily like that my mat was like this hopeful place where it's like, oh, it's all going to be okay, sister. Often it was like, you're fucking killing yourself. And this is the problem. Like often that's what it was like. So it wasn't like I just was super peaceful. It was like, wake up. Yeah. Often it was like, wake up.
Do you think yoga saved your life?
I do. Yeah, I do. Could it have been something different? Maybe. Like, I don't necessarily think like asana saved my life. I think breath and movement and honesty, and for whatever reason, I was able to continue to come back to this. So like maybe it could have been martial arts, or maybe it could have been gardening, or maybe it could have been surfing. I don't think it was necessarily the asana, but for whatever reason, for me, that is the thing that I connected with. That's the thing that I connected with. Yeah. And there was enough philosophy in there, and Buddhist philosophy as well, that I was introduced to kind of right at the beginning. That teacher taught a lot from the Buddhist philosophy. And right away, it felt like it was speaking to me. So I think a lot of it was the philosophy, especially Buddhism, which is really this admittance of like, hey, just because life is hard doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. Like, that's part of life. And that's something that in a really, really hard spot felt like a salve. It felt like something I really needed to hear. And I was like, oh, okay. Maybe I'm not bad.
So that's a really interesting part of your recovery journey, because I heard you say previously several times that you were actually at a point in your life where you were just linking in with being bad.
Yeah.
And where did that come from? And what did that teaching in Buddhism, how did that change your thinking about yourself going forward?
Yeah, it really changed everything. So I had this really story about like myself, like you being bad. I got, like, when I was 14, I got pregnant the first time I ever had sex. But so I really, from that trauma, I really, really carried this thing that I was bad, that I was flawed, and that I was like marked, the scarlet letter, or whatever metaphor you want to use, on me, especially coming from a very Christian conservative part of the world. And so always thinking that. So I kind of like matched my actions to my story. So instead of being like, oh, I'm bad, I was like, oh, okay, I'll be bad.
Right.
It was like this sense of like me trying to own something that was painful. So if I owned it, then it didn't hurt as bad.
Was that a coping mechanism for you? Like, was that like taking control over that part? Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was a coping mechanism. It was a way in which to mitigate the part that hurt, and instead have this part that was like, really, I'm fine. I'm choosing this. Which there's a lot more power. There's a lot more power in that. Yeah.
And then in replacing that thought, when you looked behind the coping mechanism, well, actually, I am not having to be bad and I'm still going to be okay. How did you integrate that into your life going forward?
It was hard. It was very challenging. Let me parse that out a little bit. I'm going to back up a little bit. One thing that happened whenever I started kind of hearing about the Buddhist philosophy of like, oh, okay, maybe this badness isn't mine, or maybe this like pain isn't mine, because what the Buddha was teaching was that like we all suffer this pain, and it has a different story wrapped around it, but the pain is not personal. Like it means that you're part of this thing. Because whenever we like shame ourselves, it's incredibly isolating. Shame incredibly isolates us. But when we recognize that like shame is suffering and suffering is not personal, that it's to everyone has this in its own way, then just that reduces the separation, which then begins to reduce the shame. So that all kind of is linked up together. So it begin to feel like a part of thing rather than a separate then. Another thing that she said, the yoga teacher, I wish I knew her name. She's just this like archetype in my mind. But that was the first time I'd ever really heard about namaste. And I know that there's all this, conversation around this word now, but then I think I'd heard the word before, but she essentially said namaste, like the wise part of me sees the wise part of you, something like that. And I was like, oh. And I was like, I have a wise part. Oh, you say you do? You see it? Because I didn't think that I didn't ever think about the fact that I had parts of myself. That, yeah, I have this part of myself that is a total shit show. But I also have a wiser part of myself, and that I don't have to act from just that one place. So that was actually a really big revelation to me, that, oh, I'm not just what I'm doing. I'm not just the perception of other people or myself in this one thing, that I'm actually dynamic and that I have lots of parts. And that was really the first time in that namaste, whenever she explained the way she explained it, that was the first time that I ever sunk that in, which was big.
And it is interesting. I find, especially because you said you had that experience when you were 14 and you fell pregnant for the first time. I think that's probably one very strong traumatic experience as a part of that whole evolution of your story. But it's also the time when we form our personality, when we find our identity. And I think it's quite remarkable that in that time we do get to experience probably the first time our personality fractions, because we have to now get in dissonance with our personality to say, I am this and I'm not that, but I'm that and I'm not this. So I myself also had been going through trauma at the same age. So I can resonate with the sort of split in personality and the fragmentation and the separation that happens through that. So when you are on your healing and recovery journey and you're trying to pull those pieces back in to kind of, let's just say there's this bad part of me that's here, but there's also this good part of me that's there. And all of that is me. So therefore, I'm not excluding parts of me. It's almost like accepting the good and the bad. So the wise parts and the unwise parts as well. What was your experience with that?
Yeah, I think it just really let me off the hook, all the pressure that we have to be this like one thing, like this is who I am. And I think regardless of what we put after the sentence I am, to believe that that is us in our completeness is incorrect, and at some point is going to create friction if we've like chosen this one identity, that this is who I am, and not given enough space for our shifting ecology. Like I really believe that we all have this like inner ecology that encompasses so much, and the grand adventure of humaning and hopefully the grand adventure of becoming whole is about setting a wider table for all the different parts of us rather than continuing to compartmentalize, which is what life has us do naturally. You know, we are applauded for certain things, we are shunned for certain things, and then we internalize those external voices, and then we do that same shaming to ourselves. Like often the ways in which we shame ourselves actually come from an outside voice, and we've internalized it, and we think it's us.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that, yeah, hopefully that our capacity to hold really wide arms for all parts of ourselves is the goal.
When you say, when we don't do it and we don't invite all these parts, then we create shame. What has to happen? And is it an easy process? I'm laughing because I know
No,
it's not. But
it's not easy. Is it worth it? Yes. Not
yeah.
easy.
Was that in itself to invite those parts of you that had been blocked, that hadn't been fully been accepted? Has that been in itself a spiritual experience for you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm still doing it. I'm still in the process. There's still absolutely parts of myself that are very hard to come in contact with, that they're quite guarded, they're quite protected. And so coming closer slowly, you know, meeting, it's a long process. It's not easy. And, you know, I don't really think that there's this point to which all of a sudden we're like integrated, fully integrated, and everything is there. And I don't think that that even needs to be the goal.
Mm-hmm.
It's about, there's no like finish line. There's no like complete, there's really just, you know, continuing to bump up against ourselves in, different spaces. And there's some quote that I was kind of thinking about there. There's no, this thing is never really done. It's just, yeah, meeting new parts of ourselves in the light and in the dark. And then we also don't have this set of characters either. Like as soon as we think we figured ourselves out, then we have another part that's came up, or we're constantly changing. So I think in our Western productive mindset, we always want to like check a box, and we want to like close the case. And it's not that kind of thing. It's an evolution. It's always. I got this really funny shirt the other day. I was in Bali, and I needed, at night it gets still chilly. It still gets chilly on your motorbike, and I pulled over at this little thrift store and bought this shirt. And there were all these like these like Korean sweatshirts that had these like words on them that don't really make sense.
Yeah.
But I got one of them, and it actually says "The Eternal Attending."
Yeah, I love that.
I love it. I love it. And I don't think it probably means what they meant it to mean, but for me, I'm like, it's the eternal attending. And at one point that sounds like we're eternally attending ourselves, which is true. Like this is like work, but I mean, it is, but it's also like, it's the eternal attending. We're eternally, hopefully turning towards ourselves and saying, hey, what's here? And like we can do it like it's a big weight on our shoulders, or we can, like Ram Dass says, or we can do it like it's part of the dance.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's so funny. I'll have to show it to you. It's so funny. The eternal attending.
I love that. It's perfect.
It's perfect. I'm like, that's perfect. I don't know if they meant to make that perfect, but it was great.
Yeah. And I want to just jump back to the point where you say it's the parts that we allow ourselves to see and accept, but some of the parts we don't even know that they are there, right? So what happened to you when you first were actually told to this Buddhist teaching, there's this part of you and it's okay, because that part of you served a purpose for such a long time, and it's okay that it was there. What can we do, however, when there are parts of us that are holding us back and we don't really know what they are?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's the eternal attending. It's getting, you know, a little bit, a bit more curious and a bit more curious. And like I do, IFS work, which internal family systems work with my
Mm-hmm.
therapist,
Mm-hmm.
also called parts work or constellation. There's lots of different ways, but essentially it works within a paradigm, or archetype work really,
Mm-hmm.
works within a paradigm that there's all these different parts of us. And I think that once we learn some of the main characters and the roles, then we begin to see ourselves in that way. And then it becomes easier to get more nuanced with it. Like if we can like come to the recognition and the understanding that, okay, I have lots of diversity within me, and we can begin to say, oh, this part, oh, this is this part, then it's naturally we get more nuance with saying, oh, i think this I think this is a different part. And
Yeah.
I will do that often, is like sometimes I'm doing, a meditation, or I'm doing kind of this work, talking to, meeting a part of myself, and then I'll be like, all of a sudden I'll realize, like, there's a different part here. Like
Oh.
there's another part here. And it's really interesting when that happens, because you can begin to kind of, as our minds do, compartmentalize. So it's kind of like, this is this character, this is this character. And then all of a sudden I'm like, what is this? Don't think I think it's something new. And then all of a sudden there's this other, it sounds weird.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you that I was so anti all of this whenever I was like going early in recovery. My therapist was always wanting me to like talk to an empty chair, like it was my inner child, and I would be like, "The fuck?" Like I never wanted to do it, and now it's like so much
Wow.
work. But so it can feel awkward and it can feel challenging, especially if you're resistant to it.
Mm-hmm.
I was just naturally rebellious and resistant to everything, but it really, really has been a total gift. And there's lots of different models and people who can support the exploration, because I think it's kind of hard to do just solo on yourself, with yourself in the beginning, even though there are there's great resources and books and things out there that can help you explore. But it's really nice to explore your inner map with someone who has seen many maps.
Yeah. Yeah. I find it interesting, in particular, when I think of some people from my like past friendships, where I remember people said, I don't need a therapist, I don't need help. I can look all of that up in a book. And I personally have experienced that that's not true, because you, again, can only do as much work in your own mind until you come to the point where you realize there's more and I can't just get there. And I do need someone to mirror that back to me.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah,
really interesting.
absolutely. The reflection, there's so much we can do on our own. I believe that. And then there is, we absolutely will hit walls with that. And the reflection, we see ourselves in relation to others. Others can see things that we can't see. And finding really trusted people to walk that with. In, Buddhism, they would call it like the Sangha, which, the Buddha said is more important than any of the teachings, is
Mm.
to life with honest people that have your best interest in mind, is actually the most powerful spiritual practice that you can do.
And how healing is it to have those people around when you're at your lowest point?
Yeah, that's the most impactful thing that we could do. And often that's also not the
Mm.
case.
What do you
You know,
mean?
often it's not the case that those people are around. There's going to be many moments where we'll hit our knees to the floor and we'll be by ourselves. Those dark nights of the soul, and hopefully that pain of the aloneness moves us towards connection, which is exactly what the pain of aloneness is really flagged to do. Like, all pain has a story, not a story in it. All pain is a messenger to get us to do something different. So that really radical feeling of unbelonging and aloneness is hopefully, when it's adaptive, is moving us towards connection. But what it can do is it can sink us deeper into disconnection, like say in depression or in some addictions, is that rather than moving us towards something that would serve, it can deepen us down into the rabbit hole.
Okay, question. When we are on a downward trajectory towards deeper, deeper rabbit hole, first question, do we notice it? And second question, if we notice it, what can we do about it?
I don't have much authority in this area. What I feel okay to say is that we begin to map ourselves in any direction, like our tendencies, our habituations. Like, hopefully we begin to recognize patterns that happen. I've been fortunate to not have dealt with depression. I've dealt with many a downward spiral, but not depressive episodes. I have many friends who have, and what has been helpful for them has been to be able to talk to the people who they love and who love them when they're not in that space, because whenever they're in that space, it's impossible to talk about. It can be.
Yeah.
So a girlfriend of mine says that, like, I know that the thing that I need to do is to tell you that I need help, but I actually and literally cannot when I'm in that place. I cannot tell you that I need help. And what she's done is set up like a code word system so that if she reaches out and says, she'll make up a word and say like yellow or whatever, that it's like it flags to at what state she's in. Cause she's like literally, she's been in places where she's just kind of went mute essentially in depressions and then like can't, like there's a block. But if it can be talked about, not because then she comes out and she's in a lot of shame and then you don't want to talk about it. And you just want to go on with your life. And then it happens again and there's been no map that's been created with the people around you. So that's the way that she's done it, is that when she's came out of it, she's kind of made this resource thing of like, when this happens again, because it likely can, then here's maybe a way in which to deal with it that allows the people around her to have some sort of a common understanding, to be able to locate her when she's unable to locate herself verbally.
Yeah. That's
It's
brilliant.
all so different for everyone, but that's something that's really helped her. And she has very severe, can have very severe episodes. But with someone who doesn't go, if there is still communicative, like more communication, I think it's still about having a plan. And I work with a lot of people in addiction recovery, and there's, relapse planning. Like what happens when you find yourself, not necessarily, I know they always say like, if you want to drink, then call someone. Okay. Well, I can be the first person to say that is the last thing I would ever do.
Yeah.
Back in the day, I may now, but back in the day, if I wanted to drink, there was no pause between me and the drink. Because if I was going to call you, you were going to tell me not to. And I wanted to. So like, no, I'm not going to call you. But I would eventually, from the bottom of a bottle, call someone and ask for help. So it's like, what are the action plans? What's the action plan if I do happen to pick up the phone before I tilt the bottle down my throat? Or what happens when I call you and I'm shit-faced? Do I need to get to a detox? Do I need to stay the night at somebody's house? Do I need, like, what's the plan? What am I likely to do? Someone needs to come and get my keys, for one, because I'm a driver. Like, it's like knowing yourself and being honest. What's likely to happen? And I know that we like to think that it's not going to happen again, especially people who've been in longer term recovery. I'm in 11 years recovery right now. I think it's very important I don't dwell on it at all, but I absolutely know that I'm so fallible, and that most people relapse.
Yeah.
And I know many people who have relapsed after a very successful 10, 15 years. And I think often whenever it's been after a long time, it's quite spectacular. It can be quite detrimental because the longer that it's been, often the shame is much, much deeper. It would be really hard for me to ask for help. But I think it's just about being honest. Like, I don't tell anyone that like, oh, I'm never ever going to drink again. I'm like, I hope I don't. I don't think about it. But if I did, yeah, I'd have to go get help. And I think that if we don't allow that in our life, or I don't call myself like recovered either. So I think that active recovery is really important, whether that is depression or self-harm or, substance abuse. Really, we're all in recovery from something. And recovery is not a dirty word. Like, so for people to say, I'm recovered, it's like, well, are you? Like, there's nothing wrong with being in recovery. Like, you're human. It's all good.
That part of self-compassion, to be able to say to myself, I'm in this, but I'm in this for a reason and I need to be mild in the judgment with myself.
Mm-hmm.
What role does that play?
To give ourselves some grace.
Yeah.
Massive. We're often in our own way. And often the part of us that's in our own way is this hypercritical part that, like I mentioned earlier, is likely not our own voice. If we think about where have we heard these things before, where did this come from? It's often an outside voice, whether it's familial or cultural or something. It will sound like us in our own brain, but it's been internalized. So I think it's really interesting to figure out, first where that voice comes from, because it depersonalizes it.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it not like ours. It's like, oh, this was my conditioning. That's different than like, I am like this way. And like, oh, this was my environment. We're highly porous and affected creatures, and we're highly affected by our environments and our cultures that we were in. So finding that part of us, that more skillful part, that wiser part, we'll have different language for it, that Buddhism often will call it like Buddha nature, or that basic goodness within us that is our inner adult, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to like find that part as well. And often it's both at the same time. Even think about like the devil and the angel on the shoulder, which is this really old archetype metaphor. It's like, that's parts. Yeah. Those are parts. We have both of those. But to bring those both in, it's like, what I'm hearing the loudest of is this part of me that's saying that you fucked up again. You're never going to get this right. You're never going to belong, or whatever is the voice says. It says all kinds of things. Like trying to call in this other piece and seeing if they can both just be there. One doesn't have to win over the other one, but like just allowing them both to be there really just can, just even that can like settle it a bit. Like bringing that wise voice in, even if you don't even believe it sometimes. It's just like, just let it like have a say. And it's hard. It's absolutely hard, but being able to name it as well, of like, oh, that's my my shame talking, or that's my inner, I've named some of my parts. So I have this really highly critical part of me named Susan.
Right.
And
what's Susan like?
She is just a mess. She's like she has like a clipboard, and she's got a perm, and she has like this matching wind jacket suit on, and she has like a whistle, and she's just always telling me where to be, how to stand. She's like the stage mom for like, like a play or something, like, you over there, and you over there, and you over there, and nope, not right. Nope, not right. It's like nothing's right. And everything's wrong. But she's doing it because she's trying to, like, if she thinks that if she doesn't help me, then like my life's going to fall apart. If I don't do all these things, and it's a sense of urgency, and I have to keep everything together. And like, if she doesn't do it, then no one will. Like, it's this sense, which that part of me, Susan, has gotten me very far in doing things. And Susan never really came online until after my addiction, because like my life was a hot mess. So Susan came in and she overcompensated on getting my shit together.
Wow.
Yeah. So Susan built this yoga business, and Susan's traveling the world, and Susan has, this team that she works with, and everything gets done, but sometimes it doesn't get done if Susan doesn't do it.
Why?
Because that's just what she thinks. She thinks that because she needs this big role, that look what she's done. Like, she's created this successful thing because she's very meticulous, and she's like doing all these things. So often if I'm like, I'm relaxing, I'm doing whatever, then she's like, you got shit to do. So this is a sense of urgency of me still needing to do the things. Like, have you answered that email? Have you done this thing? Did you check her work? Do you think they sent that email? Like, it's just this like nagging thing. And sometimes it's like work, Susan, things like this. But then it can also be like, why did you say it like that? They took that wrong. You shouldn't have been like that. That class you taught, not going to cut it. It's this as well. And then it can get even bigger. It just depends on the context. And it's a part that, it's not a bad part of me. It's a good part of me that has the mic too often. She needs to relax. Susan needs to go on vacation. But it's been really and I mention all of this because it's very good for me to be able to identify it and not just say, oh, there's my critical part, but I'm like, there's Susan. And there's something that even just saying that, even just being able to name her diffuses it. Because I have this picture of Susan with this perm and a clipboard and a whistle. And I'm just like, Susan. And something about that just drops my shoulders. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm being so obnoxious. Like Susan is taking over.
Right.
And there's something about being able to see it outside of us. And we can do that with, all of our different parts. And we can be more curious when we can look at something. It's hard to like, if we're so in it and it's like glued to us, then it's really hard to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Suzanne, tell me more about her. So Susan, what kind of parts in your life, you already told us what she has brought to your life is a lot of good things, like building the business, traveling. What are the things you missed out on because of Susan?
I think a lot of presence.
Mm.
This is something that I've been working on for quite some time, of this balance, this work-life balance that, is this moving target. But I've been in lots of places where I didn't feel like I was really present in this like beautiful place. Like, look where I've managed to get to. And then I'm thinking about answering an email or something, or like planning something for something. Like, what I do is trainings and retreats and courses, and they're in the future. So I'm often planning, like I'm in this fantasy mode a lot, in this planning mode, which I need to be, but it's really hard to let it go. And also I think Susan, at different points in my life, more so than others, has equated my value with success. And I think whenever we come from a background such as mine, or other backgrounds where we spent a lot of our life feeling really worthless about ourselves, there's this sense of needing to prove something. This sense of like, look, it wasn't all a waste. Look how good I'm doing now. And it's like, okay, I can quit proving myself now. Like, I actually didn't need to do any of these things if I didn't want to. I could have, you know what I mean? This overcompensation of needing to stake my claim in the world and my worth as a human doesn't need to be tied to my productivity. And I think that it's a natural rebound. Yeah, that we feel like we need to prove something. Yeah.
Yeah, I do think that there's a lot of people in the world exactly at that point, some wanting to get out of it, some not wanting to get out of it, and they will stay in the hustle trying to make that point, which again, I believe comes back to that internal voice that often is actually the voice of their parents. Like, have you done this good enough? You have got good grades in school, therefore I love you. Yeah, it's a conditioning in itself where our subconscious still repeats the same thing over and over again. But I'm really glad that you came to the point where you're like, no, I am worthy no matter what I do. So that's obviously not Suzanne. Who's
That would
that?
be the wiser part. That would be my wiser, my wiser part, which I should name, that I don't have a name for that one. Yeah, it's just kind of this, just my more adult part, my wiser self, or I guess self energy is what they would call it in IFS, which is the inner adult, essentially. One thing I was going to say, that it is an interesting exercise to, or just to reflect about, what were you praised for as a kid? For sports? For, like, it's funny now. I've been playing basketball in Bali.
I want to play with you.
I love it so much. And I grew up playing basketball, and my parents they met playing college basketball. My dad was a coach. My family were coaches. So I always really, really wanted my dad's approval playing basketball, like really, really wanted it. And my first experience ever having jealousy, actually, was when we would play a game, and my dad would have been the coach, or even just when he wasn't coaching, he would be like, Courtney played a really good game. And I'd be like, Courtney. That's her real name too. I remember her real name, Courtney. And that was like my first experience with actually envy. It's actually envy, not jealousy. The first, and I remember that because if Courtney played good, then that meant that I couldn't have played good, and like holding that. So funny though. But so now I play basketball in Bali and I love it. I love it. But it's interesting how when I play bad, it will affect my evening. I'm very upset with myself. And
Really?
when I play, yeah,
Wow.
I'm very competitive in general, which basketball is a good place to let it out so it doesn't come out in other places. But I'll be like, oh God, like I got to practice my outside shot or whatever. Like I'll let it get to me. But then at the other side, whenever people are like, wow, I'm the only chick who plays this, all dudes. So just by default, people are always impressed. But I do play well, but whenever I do play extra well and people give me compliments, it's really funny. I'm like, like I really like, oh, I really take it. And it's because I really wanted my dad's approval when I was younger. So it's really funny to notice it now. How silly I am with it, but it just affects me, and it probably always will at some point. And like surfing, like I come here and surf, so I've always been naturally athletically talented in many things. So I moved to Australia 4 years ago, and I attempt to surf, and I'm horrible at it, and I get upset about it. I think that the ocean is personally attacking me. I've got out of the water before. I've got out of the water before, and Josh said I just go, not interested. And I got my left. And he's laughing, and he tries to like show me how to do things, and and he'll be like, just try this, and I'm like, just. But if I have a good day on the board and I'm like, I love this, I want to teach a yoga and surfing retreat, and all the way on the other end of it. So I'm really affected by physical performance because of how I digested that as a child. And I know unfortunately, a lot of people, especially women, are praised for their looks. You're so pretty. What a pretty little girl. What a pretty, blah, 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 blah. And then somebody who's always their whole life commented upon, that's really challenging.
That was me. Yeah. I have a sister who's a year older. She's a very beautiful woman. And when we grew up, obviously she went through the whole puberty thing earlier than me. So I was the late one. And it's affected me in so many ways because she got all the attention from the boys. I remember had an experience where a guy in school that I really liked, I used to hang out with him and his brother, and we were just like, kids playing around and exploring, having fun, and very, very innocent. But I remember walking from the school bus to my school, and we would walk together. And then right in the middle of the conversation, he said to me, is your sister with someone? Out of the blue. And I felt that crush in my heart, like that, my heart being crushed. And he's like, well, she's so beautiful. And I stood there thinking I'm not. So, ouch, a really big one. And I found other ways to compensate that. So I found other ways than in being particularly good and going to, when I was 17, moved to the States to live in Texas for a year. Just that became my thing, to always be a bit out of reach so that then I would still be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. We find clever ways to mitigate anything, or to work with, or to go around, or to maneuver around whatever it is. And to get the love and the attention and the acceptance that is a biological need. Like the ways in which we do this often feel unsavory or like hard to talk about. The ways in which we, have seek belonging, the ways in which we still do. I mean, we're really driven by this, and it's actually incredibly like the most basic natural thing that we're seeking connection. Even though, sometimes it's hard to admit the ways in which we do that. It's very juicy discussion, though.
That is. Yeah. Which makes me want to ask you something. One of the things you said earlier is you had to come to a point where you became brutally honest with yourself. What kind of a role does honesty play now in your life?
Well, I like to think that it's very front and center, but I know how denial works. very, very slippery. And there's also shades of truth, and truth also changes. There's a zillion different truths, but there's nuance to truth. There's gray area, and that does shift. There's something around like the truer thing, which I think is an interesting concept. I can feel sometimes that I've made up, well, our lives are ran on stories. We're all making up stories all the time. So maybe, for example, there's something that's hurting, there's something that doesn't feel right, and I am trying to, I will naturally create a story to try to encapsulate the feeling or the why around what's happening here. And I can feel myself sometimes like reaching for something to make sense of the way in which I'm feeling. Sometimes it feels like I have playing cards in my hands, and I'm kind of like, oh, this one feels true. I'm like, oh, wait. Maybe this story, this might be what it is. I mean, we kind of do this to try to figure out like, oh, imagine like even like with a little baby or something. It's like the baby's crying and you're like, oh, are you hungry? You need a poop? Do you need a burp? Are you sleepy? You know, it's kind of like we do this with ourselves in a way. It's like, did they do it to you? Did she do it to you? Is it this place? Is it you? But we like kind of come up with these stories, and sometimes some are more true than other ones. And there's something about like, what's the truer thing? And if we can like really sit with these stories in which we tell ourselves and really feel into, and this is where I think, again, that connection with the body comes in, because our mind can make up stories all day long, but the body kind of hits at a different resonance. And if you can like really kind of run these cycles through and then kind of feel like, what's the truer thing here? And maybe there's aspects of truth in lots of things. And that's what makes it hard to decipher, because like, well, this feels true. And the fact that we have all these different parts inside of us. So to Susan, she has a truth. You know, my inner child feels like something else is a little truer. And then like my wiser self is like, well, this feels a little bit more true. So you're just like weighing all of these parts of ourselves as well. But yeah, I think that's just a good question and a good inquiry whenever I feel ambivalent around like, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this, of like, what really feels like the truer thing. And I have to get quiet, and I have to get curious, and ultimately have to be honest, and then be willing to listen to that.
I do the same thing where I'm validating my truth, as in, does that feel right? And then maybe it feels right, and I thought I had it for 1 week, and then something else happens where I'm like, I didn't have it. There is actually a different truth. What's more true than that? Yeah.
And there's just layers to it. And sometimes we have to try one on for a while.
Yeah.
It's like, does this feel true? And it's not black and white. It's not like, it's not black and white. I mean, life is complex. It's it's like leaving space and leaving time to like kind of sink into these stories, these ideas, to try on different things. And I think it's important as well to recognize that, you know, as humans, we like to be right. Everybody likes to be right. And we also make up stories all the time. So we have to be careful about the stories that we make up and the stories that we believe. It's very important that we were really careful about the stories that we believe, because whatever we do believe, we're going to try to be right about it. So we're going to confirm and validate the story that we believe. And if we're believing a story that isn't true, it can cause a lot of harm. You go back and thinking about the story that I told myself and believed very strongly for a very long time, that I was bad. I lived my life for, the next 15 years validating very loudly that story, until the story began to shift and I began to believe something else about myself. Because whatever we believe, we're going to fortify and make stronger that belief, because we want to say, yeah, you're right. You're right.
Yeah. And we're looking for evidence as well, right?
It's confirmation bias.
Yeah.
Really basic thing. And it can change a life, and for the better or for the worse. This is essentially what, affirmations and things like this is a whole other topic, but, beginning to change the story and believe something different.
Because also those stories can imprison us.
Absolutely.
How do you think is making these stories up in our minds and believing them a hindrance to true belonging?
Well, I think a story feels really flat often, like it's not dynamic. Often a story is something that it's like, okay, that's what it is. I figured it out. That's what it is. It's because you're bad. Or whatever it is. Like a story often is like, has a period at the end of it. This is the story. This is what's happening. And it doesn't leave space for curiosity. I think Stephen Jenkinson said that wonder takes a willingness to be uncertain. So for us to stay in this like wonder of like, who are we? What parts of myself have I not been introduced to yet? What else is here? We have to be willing to be uncertain about ourselves. We have to be willing to not know, and to not know is very vulnerable. We like to know because whether the story about the world and ourselves that we create is something that feels supportive or it doesn't, at least we know. Because if we just don't know, that can feel really wild and liminal and challenging. So it's like, how can we safely lean into wonder, safely lean into this like not knowing without it feeling like the full rug of life has not been pulled out from underneath us? Because then it leaves room for possibility to happen. And we likely, and a lot of times, we need possibility to create a new story. And I really like allowing our lives and our roles in it to take new shapes. And if we're so addicted, or if we're so stuck on the certain shape of who we are or the story of who we are, then we'll kind of just be playing that destiny out. But is it really? It's not really destiny. It's really just that our story's on a hamster wheel. Because left to life's devices, everything's always changing. So if we're unwilling to allow ourselves to change, then we're really blocking that flow of, that natural flow of life, which is hard.
And so if we're blocking the natural flow of life, do we also block belonging then? Is that what it is?
Depends on the story that we're telling, I suppose, or what we're believing. It's like, what are we believing? What are we making it mean? Most of us have a story of not belonging in some way at some point in our lives, of the whys, of how we don't belong and why we don't belong. Like just the whys in which we don't fit in. First, that story needs to be able to change shape. And Stephen Jenkinson again really speaks to belonging as that it's actually not a feeling, that it's actually more than that, that it's a verb, that belonging is something that we practice, it's something that we do. So even just changing what that word means, the type of grammar that word is, be it a feeling or verb, changes the story around it. Is it something that I just like, I walk into and it's like, oh, I feel it or I don't? Like this room, you all are making me feel like I belong, or you're making me feel like I don't. To like, oh, I'm practicing belonging to this land or this community or this thing, is this action, which is an understanding that there's a relationship and a reciprocity that's taking place rather than a passive, I feel it or I don't. So it's a fairly radical change in narrative.
Yeah. It resonates a lot as well with what I've experienced in the last years, because I basically had to let a part of myself die that was that story, that was trapped in that story. And out of that, I want new perspective to see that the relationships that I was in weren't, and I mean friendships, my surroundings at work, everything wasn't reciprocal. So I was giving, but I also didn't put the right boundaries in place. I had to go clean slate with that to give the part of me that I was becoming a new chance. to find belonging, and then really evaluate, well, is this a friendship that is serving my sense of belonging, because it is an act, and it's also something that I am happily investing in with my time and energy, or not.
Yeah.
And it's actually brought me back closer again with my family, especially my parents. They have been showing up for me so much over the last years, and that's been really through actions, through showing, hey, we got you, life does this sometimes, and I hope to be there for them one day too.
Yeah, that's really, I mean, relationship in action. And where now we have all these relationships where it's just there's not like the action behind it, which I think is interesting. I was hearing the other day, like now we will meet up for coffees or for visiting, but back in the day, whenever you would have met up with community, you were always working together. Kind of like these working bees is what people call it in Australia. It's like whenever you would be together, it would be community coming together to help each other do stuff. And of course, you'd be talking and probably be partying a bit and dancing and singing, but there was actually always like an action. And it was almost like this ritual action that was happening, which creates cohesion at a different level. It's that bonding. It's the bonding piece, which is why, it feels different to like go camping and hiking with a group of people than to like go out to dinner with a group of people. Like there's something deeper. You leave with a deeper connection.
That's really beautiful. Speaking of hiking, if you guys do any hikes anytime soon, I would love to come along.
We're going down. We're going to do a canyon down, but we're going down to the Blue Mountains.
Oh, lovely.
End of October. Yeah, to let me know if you're down in that area. Yeah, I don't think we have anything planned up here at the moment, but.
So tell us what's coming up for you. How can people work with you, and how can they get to know you more and your work?
Yeah, well, I have heaps of yoga videos, so asana videos online, on a bunch free on YouTube. And then I have a membership online shala named CCY Studio. Mm-hmm. But Cole Chance, you can type my name in YouTube or in Google, or Cole Chance Yoga is my website. You can find all kinds of stuff. I also am getting ready to teach Emerge, which is my addiction recovery course, and that takes off into the month. Super excited about that. It's one of my favorite things I do. It's 10 weeks and it's pretty intensive. We meet 4 times a week, and it is, just a deep dive into self, but through community. And we weave in Buddhism and neuroscience and internal family systems and trauma recovery. There's so much in there. Ritual.
Amazing.
Yeah, there's so much in there. It's beautiful. And then I teach yoga teacher training. So I have a 200-hour coming up in Bali, 300 hours online. And then, some retreats coming up for next year, maybe Europe, States, and then one in Bali as well. It's always happening.
So exciting.
It's keeping me busy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing all your insights and beautiful wisdom with us. I really appreciate you. I love you, and I hope to give you a hug soon as well.
Yeah, same. Love you too, babe. Yeah. Good chatting with you.
If you enjoyed this episode, please hit subscribe and share this episode with someone who can benefit from it. Have a beautiful day, bliss and bless.